If you could do anything in the world and money was no option, what would you do? Write a great book, travel, spend more time with your family and friends? All of us dream of doing something like that. I look back and think of some of the jobs I've done, and the ones that have given me the most pleasure were the ones I didn't get paid for. Back when I was a 14-year-old kid, I worked for $1.50 an hour at a fish and chips joint in Cincinnati. I learned two things. First, Lysol cannot cover up the smell of fish and chips if you're going to a party. And number two, you can stick your hand, if it's covered with fish batter, into boiling oil for just a second without getting burned. Well, maybe I learned a few other things in the course of working there. I hauled hay in Oklahoma. I wrote sports for a newspaper in Cincinnati. Those were great jobs. But I wonder, when we think of our lives and how our jobs fit into it, what gives us the most meaning and purpose and pleasure in life? Well, I was reading a book last year called Utopia for Realists. It was written by a Dutch historian, Rutger Bregman. And Bregman says, really, we should only be working about 15 hours a week. That's not surprising. Even 250 years ago, old Ben Franklin said that by this time, we'd only be working 4 hours a week. And the second thing Bregman said is, maybe everyone should get a universal income. Well, that was suggested by one of the candidates in the election earlier this year. And everyone thought that was kind of silly. Well, until the pandemic came along and we realized, well, we do sometimes need assistance. I'm thinking of these things because there's a story in the New Testament about a guy who has a vineyard. Have you ever noticed in the Bible there's a lot of vineyards and a lot of wine? I think Jesus must have liked that. And he's got this vineyard and he hires people to work for him. And some of them work all day and it's hot and sweaty work. And he finds out in the middle of the day he needs more workers, so he hires some. And as the afternoon goes on, he needs even more workers, so he hires them too. And finally, at the last hour of the day, he goes out and finds even more workers. Now, here's the purpose of the story. When it comes time to get paid, well, he pays the all-day workers first. Well, they get their wage, and he pays then those who only worked less and less. And it comes out, you know what? Everybody gets the same thing. Well, that just doesn't seem to be fair, does it? Well, it's true in our lives as well, that sometimes what we get doesn't equal what we've worked for. Life just sometimes doesn't seem to be fair. And we look at other people and we wonder, what would they do if someone gave them money for free? We don't think they'd write a book like we would. We don't think they'd travel and make the world a better place like we would. We think they'd squander it and spend it on too much drinking and drugging. Well, Jesus' story reminds us that sometimes we get what we don't deserve. I remember I had a colleague in New Haven. Her father was a famous journalist during the Vietnam War, but she said it was really her grandmother that she identified with most. Her grandmother was a Pall Mall smoking, housecoat wearing kind of older woman who had a dog that she loved dearly named Amos. Except Amos was a terror in the neighborhood. After hours at night, he'd go out in the alley and prowl and get into everyone's garbage cans and just make a royal mess. Well, everyone knew it was Amos, but Grandma swore up and down, no, it couldn't be her dog. Well, one day, Amos died, and the neighborhood sighed a breath of relief, thinking, well, his reign of terror was over. But you know what happened? A couple nights later, something got into the trash, garbage strewn everywhere, cans turned over. Well, maybe
Maybe they had misjudged that poor dog. Maybe it wasn't Amos after all. In fact, for weeks and months and even years after Amos the dog died, something was still getting into the trash cans. They wondered what in the world it could be, until one neighbor put up a camera. One night, they saw a grandmother wearing a frilly housecoat, smoking Pall Mall cigarettes, dangling from her lips, out there turning over the trash cans and making a royal mess of the garbage. Because if Amos was going to get blamed for it, then everybody else was as well. Sometimes we don't get what we deserve. Sometimes we get fairness instead. We get grace. We get forgiveness. And sometimes that's just what we need.